everyone. We are here with Carolyn Hazel today, and we're talking to Carolyn about her solo show that is up at Waterstone Gallery right now. The show's titled First Phrase, and it's a beautiful combination of fiber and ceramic and an interesting installation piece as well. Can you talk us through this, Carolyn?
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone for tuning in, and it's lovely to be here with you. Wanted to start by showing a few installation shots of the show. This is from the end of the day when we get really lovely late afternoon light coming in through the front gallery windows, and I love the way it illuminates the space. This show's up through August 1st, so there's still about a week and a half to catch it. We're open Tuesday through Saturday, 11 to 5:30, and Sunday, 11 to 4. And I've been doing lots of one-on-one meetings with people. So if you want to meet me at the gallery, you're welcome to reach out through our gallery site or through my Instagram at Carolyn Hazel to connect around a time. Here's another couple of installation shots. And you can see that there are some domestic objects that are included in the show, and that's for a few reasons, but one of them is to I really wanted the show to have a kind of cozy and homey and really sensory rich quality to it that extends even to having hinoki and cedar essential oil on some of the textiles, so there's actually fragrance in the space. We've just gone through this, like we've kind of been deprived of rich experiences of the world, so I wanted this to have a really rich and light quality to it. Here's a couple more shots. In the center of the exhibition is all of the vessels, the Forget-Me-Not vessel series that I'll talk about a little bit later, and then the front window, which has a domestic installation.
It looks like someone's living room.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's like the living room I want to be in.
A couple more detail shots that show some of the textures, and these objects are all kind of neutral toned and richly textured, and they tend to feel nostalgic or familiar. They're really normal, basic, everyday objects, and it's one of the things that I like about the materials that I work with clay and with textiles is they're some of the earliest materials that we encounter in our lives as humans, and so I think there is a real sense of like direct connection to those materials.
And also so typically considered domestic women's work of that era, and I love that you've just kind of elevated it into a higher art.
And that feels appropriate to me because, you know, we did everything from home in this last year, and so we managed to find a way to do all of the other aspects of our life from home. And so to me, kind of further making that transition permeable between what can be in a gallery versus at home was an interesting thing to explore.
I suppose we've all been looking into each other's homes.
I know, right? Like we've come
weirdly looking at people's refrigerators and washing machines and
cats and dogs. Yes.
It feels like you just perfectly carried that into the gallery.
So the title of the show is First Phrase, and before I was a lit major, and before I'm in now district arts leadership for Portland Public School in addition to my work as an artist. But before that I was an art teacher and a language arts teacher for a decade in Oregon public schools, and so I taught English, and so language is a really important part of my creative process, and it is kind of winds its way through my work in different ways. So a phrase is just a group of two or more words that expresses an idea, but it's not complete as a sentence. And that the idea of trying to make sense of this last year between March 2020 and March 2021, to me, thinking of it as a phrase, as something that's not complete or able to be fully understood, but that's beginning to have meaning, was a helpful metaphor for my own process. And then kind of further along that line, I have a colleague who's the music counterpart for my position in visual arts, and we were talking about music theory because phrasing is also something that happens in music. And in music theory, phrasing usually does one of three things. It suggests that there's a continuation, so it starts a conversation. It can suggest a temporary rest, or it can suggest something final. And that felt also connected to how do we move forward out of this just really challenging difficult time. What will we continue on with? What will we pause temporarily, step away from, and maybe re-enter? And then finally, what will we walk away from permanently? Or who have we lost? So that's kind of the thinking behind the title of the show. I wanted to talk a little bit about a few of the groups. There's kind of all series. This work is made up of different series of works. So the Memento Mori, another literary reference. Well, this is actually as much art historical as literary. The Memento Mori is something that reminds you of your mortality and of death. And so these pieces are small, they're 12-inch, mounted on 16-inch frames, textiles with little bits of porcelain stitched into them. And I made 12 of them, one for each of the months. And during the COVID year, for me, that 12-inch size felt like something I could exert some sense of control over. It felt doable, manageable. And so each of them was kind of me following through this month-by-month experience of witnessing death at a mass scale, but also it being kind of one step removed and being permeated in everything that I was doing, but also in my own life, things were actually going quite astonishingly well in my personal life. And so that there was a lot of dissonance between those experiences. Then as a kind of hopeful counterpart to the Memento Mori, which are all about meditating on death. I mean, everything I make is in some way about death, which I do have a sense of humor about, and it's really not on purpose, but it just is kind of always an undercurrent. So the Le Fleur de Mal embroideries, these are these tiny little 6x8 embroideries. Each one has a vase that's made out of porcelain. And then the flowers themselves are imagined flowers. I had my daughter draw a series of not quite real flowers, and that's what these embroideries are based off of. Le Fleur de Mal is a famous book of poetry by Charles Baudelaire, and it translates as the flowers of evil. But I was more interested in thinking of it as not that the flowers themselves are evil, but that they are blooming in an environment of danger or evil or risk. So in these, you can see there's a tiny little seed stitch in the background that fills the surrounding space. That is the invisible atmosphere of danger, whether it was the virus itself, whether it was the wildfires that were so terrible and prevalent this last year, and that also further added to our sense of like isolation and claustrophobia, that these flowers are still managing to bloom in spite of these challenges or dangers that they're surrounded by. And so they're these just sweet offerings. You know, the spring of 2021, us kind of now emerging from that COVID year. How are we as, you know, delicate flowers also blooming as we come out of that time?
It's also just the hope that it brought with it, right? Hope in the middle of everything, and hope at the end of a year, and then with us hoping for vaccines in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then the forget-me-nots. So this series of vessels, these really have touched a nerve with visitors, and and they also really touched a nerve for me. So I've not been doing as much with ceramics in the last few years as with textiles, and these vessels really kind of brought me back into centering my practice around ceramics. So I wanted to talk about them conceptually, but I also wanted to nerd out a little bit technically about how these are made.
But what I can just say is that in the days that I've been sitting in the gallery, that anyone that has walked in, the first thing they do is make a beeline for these pots, and then they kind of like, can I touch? Because they are just so beautiful and they're asking to be touched.
They're really irresistible. And feel to the hand, they fit kind of perfectly in the hand, and then they're resting on these like fragrant pillows that are filled with crushed walnut shells. So they're also so fragile, and so they're unnerving too. It's similar to the idea of the flowers. Is this vessel is something that's standing in for us as people, and they have this beautiful delicacy, and that they're porous to their surroundings. So that the marks on all of these are made just with smoke, by absorbing smoke. I just want to give a nod to Mario Gallucci, who I collaborated with on the photographs of these pieces, and who suggested the black background, and how beautifully that connects these to a kind of painting tradition with strong chiaroscuro, really just shows them in a different way, very beautifully. So if you don't mind nerding out with me for a minute.
Yeah.
Because especially for my ceramics, for my viewers out there who know ceramic processes, you always want to get into the details of like, so how did you actually get that effect? And actually, let me back up one slide to just, again, so the marks that you see these pale colored vessels, and then they have these very fine lines. And you would imagine that that is carved into the surface or raised up on the surface, but it's not. It's actually where smoke has been absorbed through a smoke firing process into the surface that's been burnished. So anytime I make these little vessels, I make them in, I used to call them families, but I've started calling them litters. And I think that's because I'm a dog mother now. I live with 2 dogs, and so dog life really resonates with me. So each litter is usually about 6 vessels. And part of the reason for this is I work with Silver Falls porcelain, and you really can only pinch it a little bit at a time. It is a finicky mistress as a clay body. And so you need to have a few at a time that you are working, cycling through, so that there's rest time. So these photographs were taken about over the course of about 72 hours of cycling through and then waiting, cycling through and waiting. The only thing that you can't really see for scale is how big the little balls of clay are at the beginning, and they're about the size of a golf ball, so they're quite small. So after the vessels have been pinched as fine as they're going to be pinched, then they're burnished. And you can see that here in the photo on the left, the shine that is created. I use a special slip called terra sigillata. And then when you burnish on bone dry clay like this, it's really a questionable choice to make, because they're very likely to break. And there are always some casualties. These pieces have a high mortality rate, as have we this last year. So after they've been finished, they're burnished. Then I use this slip to create a resist technique. And that's what you're seeing in these last 2 photos. So in this middle photo, I've used a bottle of slip and I have dotted it on. So these have gone through the kiln one time, they've been bisqued, and I'm going to create a temporary resist that's going to allow the smoke to only get onto some parts of the clay. So then the one on the right, you can see it's been coated with slip, and then I've carved through that slip to make the clay visible underneath. Then the most exciting part is you put them into a smoky joe and you layer them with hardwood wood chips that smell wonderful. You light them on fire. And so this is a very lo-fi kind of pit firing technique that you can just control a little bit more if you do it in a smoky joe. And then you can see in the photo on the right, that's how they look when they come out. So they just look dark, completely dark. But you can see the places where there is the raised slip, and that gets scrubbed off. So then that's another, like, okay, questionable to burnish them when they're bone dry. Definitely questionable to layer them in a barbecue and light them on fire. Extra questionable to scrub them to get all the slip off after they come out of the smoke fire. But then the result is just quite spectacular. So the ones that survive really, I mean, I like to, this is a metaphor of us, and this year we've been through, like, we're really something that we have made it through this time. And we have been marked by that experience.
These are just beautiful. It's just stunning, and every one of them, it's like there's the beautiful handcrafted feel to it, but even the markings are just something that I feel like you can just keep looking at.
And then they needed
yeah. That was interesting. I loved that.
They just, we all kind of need a soft place to land right now. And I feel like the softness of the pillow elevates them and visually allows them a little breathing room, but it is a nod to how delicate they are. And it's a way of making them special that feels within the language of materials that I use in my work. I'm always kind of looking for new ways to integrate clay and textiles, but it's not usually from a like, aha, I know what I will do. It's really like an exploration. And this actually came out of, I was working on these pieces out in my studio, and I had out there this beautiful handmade pillow that was for the rings for when my now husband and I were engaged, and we got married this last year. And my mom had made me this really beautiful hand embroidered pillow and had filled it with crushed walnut shells. So it was out in my studio, and I just sort of like was tracking it in my periphery, and then was like, what if these little vessels also had pillows? So that's where that visual language, that connection was made. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is, I mean, again, you gotta have a sense of humor about these things, but my burial shroud for the year 2020. This piece is almost the largest piece that I have made, and it is actually not done, although it is up in the gallery. And this I made during a residency that I was on this March 2021, a week before I got married. I was out at the Southwester Arts Week, and I had this idea of creating a burial shroud as a way to process everything that had happened in the last year, and also to try and kind of send it on its way out of my life. And the intent is to have in the background words embroidered almost invisibly that come from what people's experiences were like. But I found as I finished all of the applique that I just, like everything in my being, just said, leave it, walk away, you need to walk away. And I think part of that was because of the photo shoot that was a part of that residency week. And so I have these photos to share also. I should say the iconography on the shroud, the imagery on the side, those are daffodils or jonquils seen very stylized in profile. And so those stand in for like the beginning of the pandemic, the spring that brought COVID. And then the flowers, the ring of flowers in the middle are the same flower, but seen it from above. And that's that year later, the cycle of 12 of having kind of completed that and reemerging in a new spring full of life and hope. And so these photographs of, this is me interacting with the shroud. This was the strangest moment of synchronicity where I was out at this residency the week before I was going to get married, and I was staying in the lodge, and they had put me in the bridal suite, and it was just a total coincidence. They didn't know I was getting married, and it was just the most wonderful coincidence. So this was my live workspace for the week, and it had this like bridal bed in it, and there were these amazing photographers out there, Chris Nash and Leah Onstadt, and no, Leah Nash and Chris Onstadt, and they were photographing artists who were making work all week. And I said, I have this idea, it's kind of dark, but I kind of want to lay in this bridal bed with the burial shroud. And they were like, yes, we're into it. We had this great, very dark, but also funny photo shoot interacting with this burial shroud. And this became to me kind of like finishing the piece, was this experience of interacting with it just before I was about to make this transition into getting married. So I'm really grateful because I feel these photographs help to tell the story of the piece in a more dynamic way than seeing it hanging on a wall.
And it's also the circle of life again, right? The symbolism of
it really is. I mean, and if you're
the start of a new life or a new phase in your life. And
if you're a lit major, the whole like getting married and the consummation of marriage and how that's a metaphor for death, and death is a metaphor for that, like, is very rich. So those are the main points I wanted to cover today. Again, this show is up through August 1st. Minnie, is there anything we didn't talk about that you think we should?
So you have a workshop that you're going to be teaching at us soon. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes. So Center for Art and Ecology, a place that I have taught for many years, and it's a magical place. I am teaching a late breaking end of summer 2-day porcelain pinch pot workshop that is August 31st through September 1st. And I think there are 3 spots left. So just got announced, and we will be using Paulus Berenson, who's a famous ceramic artist, his method for being grounded in the body and really experiencing working with clay as an extension of your living, breathing experience as a human being. So if you are interested, you can head over to Sitka Center's site and search under Drake, and you will find that workshop there.
Sounds exciting. Yeah, so your show's up for another week.
Yep.
And it's been a fantastic show. It's kind of, we've had a lot of people come through. You've had some really good sales, and so I think it does in a way feel like that COVID cycle is closing.
I agree. We were
returning to normal as far as art shows. And
yes, yeah, we were able to have First Thursday and have people through in person, had an in-person artist talk as well, and it's been really great to see people in the space encountering work in person. Okay, well, thank you for taking the time to chat with me this morning, and thanks viewers. Again, you're welcome to come see the show up through August 1st.